Every Friday night, table 7 at Marlowe's diner belongs to Daniel and to the empty chair across from him. He orders 2 meals, cuts the bread in half, slides 1 plate toward the silence, and eats alone. The waitress stopped asking long ago. The regulars learned to look away. For 3 years, this quiet ritual has unfolded, beneath the same flickering lamp, untouched. Then the door swings open, and Maya walks in charcoal coat briefcase in hand, the weight of a long week still clinging to her shoulders. She wasn't supposed to stop here tonight, but something about the half-cut bread, the soft smile aimed at, no one pulls her across the room. She sets her bag down. She pulls out the empty chair like it has always belonged to her. And she asks the one question this diner has been too afraid to ask. Who are you waiting for? 3 years before Maya ever set foot in Marlowe's diner, Daniel Hayes made a promise he did not yet understand the weight of. Sarah was thinner by then than the wedding photo on their dresser, her ring slipping every time she lifted her hand. The hospice room smelled faintly of lavender. Her sister had tucked small cloth sachets into every drawer, as if scent alone could chase the sickness out. Lily, 4 years old at the time, had fallen asleep against her mother's hip, one small fist still curled into the corner of the blanket. "Promise me something stupid," Sarah whispered. Her voice was thin, but the smile beneath it was the same one Daniel had fallen for at 23. In the back row of a community theater neither of them had wanted to be at. "Anything. Don't sit at home and rot. Every Friday go out. Order something nice. Pretend the world is still spinning, even if I'm not in it." Her fingers tightened on his the way they always had at red lights at airports, at the doors of every hospital they'd walked into together. "Don't let yourself wilt inside 4 walls. Promise me, Daniel." He promised. He had not yet known how the keeping would gut him, the Friday that Maya walked through the door of Marlowe's diner. Daniel was running late because his daughter had wanted her hair braided, like the girl on the back of a cereal box. He sat cross-legged on Lily's bedroom floor for 20 minutes, with 3 rubber bands between his teeth, fingers thick and clumsy from years of holding rebar and steel rather than ribbon. The braid came out crooked. Lily looked in the mirror, tilted her head, and declared it perfect. "Mom would have laughed," she said. "Yeah." His voice came out softer than he meant. "She would have." He kissed the top of her head and breathed in the smell of strawberry shampoo. Mrs. Whitlock from 2 doors down was already in the kitchen, warming soup the same way she did every Friday at 6. Daniel told Lily he'd be back by 9. He always was. Friday nights were the only nights he couldn't be home for, and Lily had stopped asking why a long time ago. She seemed to understand in the quiet way children sometimes understand things adults cannot bring themselves to say out loud. The drive to the diner took him 11 minutes. He could have done it with his eyes closed, and on some Fridays, the ones that fell on her birthday, on their anniversary, on the day she'd been diagnosed, he very nearly did. Across town that same evening, Maya Calder had not planned to eat anywhere at all. Her last meeting had run 40 minutes past its scheduled end, and the client, a hedge fund partner, with a habit of calling her sweetheart between balance sheets, had pushed her further than she had let anyone push her in years. She had held her face still through all of it. That was the part of running a consulting firm no one in business school ever explained to her, how much of the work came down to keeping your face still while something behind your ribs kept clenching. By the time she walked out of the glass tower on 6th Avenue, the city had cooled into the particular blue-gray of early autumn. Her assistant had booked her a reservation at someplace expensive uptown. Maya had no appetite for white tablecloths or for waiters who pulled out chairs as though she might have forgotten how chairs worked. She drove without choosing a direction. Somewhere past the freeway exit, she did not usually take the streets narrowed, and the storefronts grew smaller, and she caught sight of a hand-painted sign that read, "Marlowe's," beside a faded illustration of a coffee cup, the kind of place her brother would have stopped at without thinking. Ethan had loved diners, the ones with chipped mugs and waitresses who called everyone honey, and he used to say that the food at fancy restaurants always tasted like it was trying too hard. She had not thought of Ethan in 3 days. That she had come to understand was its own kind of betrayal. She pulled into the gravel lot, tugged the charcoal coat tighter against the wind, and stepped out before she could talk herself into something more sensible. The bell above the door chimed once. Maya took in the room the way she took in everything quickly, completely. 6 tables, 2 booths, a waitress in her 60s refilling a coffee pot with the patience of a woman who had done it 10,000 times. The smell of grilled onions and old vinyl. A jukebox in the corner that was not playing and probably had not played in years. And at the far end of the room, beneath a lamp that flickered every few seconds, a man at table 7. He was alone. The table was not set for one. Maya slid into a booth 2 tables over, ordered black coffee, and watched him without meaning to. He was a few years older than her, perhaps broad through the shoulders, in the way of men who had spent their working lives outdoors. His button-down was carefully ironed, too carefully, in the way of someone who had taught himself the task, late after losing the person who used to do it for him. On his left hand, there was a thin band of pale skin where a wedding ring had once been. Or, she realized after a second look where it had been for so many years that even its absence left a mark. The waitress brought 2 plates, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, a small side of green beans. She set one in front of the man and the second across from him in front of the empty chair, without a word and without so much as glancing in his direction. As if she had been doing this for so long, she no longer needed to look. Maya watched him take a roll from the basket. He cut it in half with a butter knife. He buttered both halves carefully, edge to edge, no corner, missed the way her mother used to butter her father's toast on Sunday mornings. And then he set one half on his own plate and the other on the plate across from him. He looked up at the empty chair, and he smiled. It was a small smile. Tired. The kind of smile a man offers across a kitchen table at the end of a long, ordinary day. Not performance, not theater. Just a private daily tenderness aimed at no one Maya could see. Something inside her chest moved sharp and sudden, like a stitch quietly giving way. She did not recognize the feeling at first. It took her a moment to understand that it was envy. She had spent 2 years trying not to feel her brother's absence. This stranger was sitting alone in a diner on a Friday night, holding his grief in both hands, as though it were something worth keeping. Before she had finished thinking it through, she was on her feet. She crossed the room without rehearsing a single word. Her briefcase hit the floor beside the empty chair with a soft thud. She pulled the chair out. The legs scraped lightly against the linoleum and sat down across from him. The buttered roll lay on the plate between them untouched. The man did not flinch. He did not startle. He simply looked up at her with the slow, careful attention of someone not entirely sure she was real. "Who are you waiting for?" Her voice came out lower than she had expected, and steadier. For a long moment, the diner seemed to thin around them. The clatter from the kitchen, the hum of the cooler behind the counter, the buzz of the lamp overhead, all of it softened the way sound does underwater. He set down his knife. She watched something move behind his eyes, the slow, deliberate weighing of a man, deciding whether to lie politely, the way decent men learn to lie to strangers, or whether to tell her the truth and live with whatever came after. When he finally spoke, his voice was even. "My wife." Her hand went still around the coffee cup. She passed 3 years ago this November. He said it without performance, without inviting her into a wound he wasn't ready to share. He simply set the fact down on the table between them beside the buttered roll. She liked the meatloaf here, said it tasted like her grandmother's. He did not add more. He did not ask Maya to leave. He did not ask why she had sat down or what business she thought she had at his table. He only looked at her with those tired, steady eyes, waiting the way a man waits at a doorway he has not yet decided to close. Maya should have apologized. She should have stood up, picked up her briefcase, and walked back to her own booth, with whatever dignity she could carry out of the moment. That was what people did. That was what she had been raised to do. Instead, she heard her own voice say, "I'm sorry I sat down. I don't know why I did." "It's okay." "No, it isn't. I had no right." The man, she did not know his name, yet gave a small, weary half-smile. "You're the first person who's asked," he said, "in 3 years." The flickering lamp above them buzzed once steadied, and stayed steady. Outside, somewhere on the road, a truck passed and was gone. Inside, 2 strangers sat across from a buttered roll on a plate that had been set every Friday for 36 months for a woman who would never come back to claim it. Maya did not get up, and Daniel, for reasons he could not have explained to himself and would not understand for weeks to come, did not ask her to. The Friday after she came back, Maya told herself on the drive over that she was returning the napkin she had borrowed and forgotten to leave behind a flimsy excuse she had folded carefully in her coat pocket and would never actually present. The truth was simpler and harder to admit. She had not slept well in the days between. Something about the quiet smile Daniel had aimed at the empty chair had lodged itself behind her sternum, and no amount of work, not the quarterly review, not the calls with Singapore, had been able to dislodge it. Daniel was already at table 7 when she walked in. He looked up, registered her, and did not look surprised. He did not look pleased either. He looked the way a man looks when he has been thinking about something he had hoped to stop thinking about. She crossed the room slowly this time. The waitress, whose name Maya had learned was Elaine, lifted the coffee pot in greeting without breaking stride. "May I?" He gestured at the empty chair, without quite meeting her eyes. She sat. The plate across from him was still set. The buttered roll, the meatloaf, the green beans arranged with that small, deliberate care she had noticed before. Maya understood, without needing to be told, that the chair wasn't hers. It would never be hers. She was a guest at someone else's table, the way a stranger in a church takes a back pew and does not presume to sing. They ate together that night without saying very much. Daniel asked her where she worked, the way men ask polite questions of women they do not entirely want to know. Maya told him the bare outline financial consulting her own firm, 23 employees, in a glass building she did not particularly like. He nodded, as if filing it away under facts that did not need to mean anything. When she stood to leave, he said almost reluctantly, "I'm Daniel." Maya. That was all. The Fridays after that arranged themselves without anyone deciding they should. Maya stopped pretending she had ended up at Marlowe's by accident. She would clear her calendar by 6, drive the long way through the streets that narrowed past the freeway exit, and slide into the chair across from Daniel as the lamp above table 7 flickered its uneven greeting. He never invited her. He never told her not to come. In the 3rd week, she learned that Sarah had been a 2nd-grade teacher. She had read aloud to her class with all the voices, and the children had cried on the last day of every school year. In the 5th week, Maya learned that Sarah had hated cilantro, the way some people hate snakes, irrationally, theatrically, with full-body recoil, and that Daniel had spent 11 years quietly picking it out of every taco he ever bought her. The detail came out without ceremony, dropped into the conversation between bites, and Daniel looked startled afterward, as though the memory had escaped without his permission. He fell quiet for several minutes, and Maya did not press him. She came to recognize the shape of him, the way his shoulders carried a low, constant weariness, even when his face was easy, the careful neatness of his shirt collars, the way his hands, broad, rough through the knuckles, moved with the thoughtful patience of a man who had learned to braid a child's hair after losing the woman who used to do it. He had told her about Lily by then, just the basics. 7 years old, liked horses she had never ridden, asked questions Daniel did not always know how to answer. What Maya did not say, because she did not yet have the words for it, was that she had begun to look forward to Fridays, the way she had once looked forward to Sundays at her grandmother's house, when she was small enough to believe a kitchen could hold the whole world. What Daniel did not say even to himself was that he had begun to set the second plate slightly closer to the center of the table, now leaving room. The wall, though, did not come down. If anything, the longer Maya stayed, the more carefully Daniel maintained it. He laughed with her occasionally. He let her tell him about the absurdities of her week, the hedge fund partner who called her sweetheart, the intern who cried in the supply closet, the client who insisted on being billed in increments of 15 minutes and then talked for 40. He listened with real attention, but whenever the conversation drifted near anything that might have asked him to feel something for her, anything that might have nudged the second plate aside, he would look down at his hands or out the window at the parking lot, and the warmth would retreat from his face like a tide pulling back from a shore. Maya understood. She had her own walls. She had built them carefully, brick by brick, over 2 years of 60-hour weeks and red-eye flights. What she did not understand yet was how much it would cost her to keep pretending she did not want him to take his down. It was the 7th Friday, or perhaps the 8th. She had stopped counting when she finally said it. The diner had emptied earlier than usual. Outside, a thin rain was beating against the window, and the lamp above table 7 had given up flickering and settled into a steady, tired hum. Daniel had asked her in the offhand way men ask when they are not sure they want the answer, whether she had family in town. "My brother lived here," she said. "Ethan. He was 3 years older than me." Daniel set down his fork. He had a heart thing, congenital. "We knew about it when we were kids. They'd told my parents he might not see 30. Then he saw 30 and 35, and we all sort of decided the doctors had been wrong. You do that, you know. You decide the bad thing isn't going to happen because it hasn't happened yet." She was looking down at her coffee. She had not planned any of this. The words were arriving in an order she had not arranged, the way water arrives at the bottom of a bowl. "He called me 2 years ago in the spring, said he wasn't feeling great, wanted to know if I could come up that weekend. I had a deal closing. I said next weekend for sure, next weekend." Her thumb pressed hard against the rim of the cup. "He died on a Tuesday. I was in a conference room in Chicago. I didn't get the call until I'd landed." The rain kept on outside. Daniel did not move. Before he went, he sent me a text, just one line. He said, "Don't stop where I'm lying down." That was it. That was the last thing he ever said to me. Her voice caught, and she did not try to smooth it over. "I've spent 2 years pretending I knew what he meant. I don't. I still don't. I just keep working harder. I keep moving faster. I tell myself that has to be what he wanted, because the other thing is too much." She had not cried in front of another person since she was 19 years old. She had trained herself out of it, the way some people train themselves out of biting their nails deliberately with effort. The first tear surprised her so completely that she touched her own cheek as if checking a stranger's face. The second came easier. The third, easier still. She did not look up. She could not bear to. Daniel did not reach across the table. He did not say, "I'm sorry," the way most people would have in the soft, useless voice of strangers at a wake. He did something quieter. He pushed the napkin holder gently toward her side of the table, the way a man passes salt at a family dinner without ceremony, without making the gesture larger than it needed to be, and he sat with her while she cried. When she had steadied, she lifted her eyes, and what she saw on his face nearly undid her again. He was not looking at her with pity. He was looking at her with recognition. The deep, terrible recognition of a man who has just realized that the wound he had assumed was his alone had been carved into someone else's chest in a different shape, and that he was not, after all, the only person at the table holding pieces of someone he had not been able to save. It was the wrong moment for him to feel what he felt. He understood that with the sharp, sudden clarity of a man stepping off a curb into traffic. The warmth that moved through him was not friendship. It had not been friendship for several Fridays now, if he was honest, and he had stopped being honest with himself about Maya somewhere around the 5th week. He stood up too fast. The chair scraped. "I'm sorry, I have to go. Lily, I told the sitter I'd be back early. I forgot." He was already pulling cash from his wallet, more than the meal cost, dropping it on the table without counting. Maya looked up at him, startled, the tears still wet on her face. "Daniel." "I'm sorry. I really am. Drive safe." He left her there in the booth at table 7, with the rain still going, and the second plate still set, and the words she had not been ready to say still sitting in her throat, like something swallowed wrong. He did not come the following Friday, or the one after. Maya sent 2 text messages short, careful the way she sent messages to clients she was afraid of losing. The first asked if he was all right. The second, a week later, said only, "I'm sorry if I made things harder." He did not answer either. The little gray bubbles sat unread on her phone like small, polite insults, and she stopped checking after a while. She told herself it was for the best. She had crossed a line that wasn't hers to cross. She had sat down at a table that had been set for someone else, and she had stayed too long, and she had mistaken a stranger's grief for an open door. Her brother, she thought bitterly, would have laughed at her. Ethan had always told her she fell for the wrong men in the wrong way, and now 2 years gone, he had been proven right by a man who had never once asked her to fall at all. It was in that 3rd week of silence that her old mentor called. Richard had founded the firm, where Maya had cut her teeth at 26, and he was the kind of man who only called when he wanted something. He wanted something now. There was a turnaround project in London, 18 months, possibly 24 full executive authority, a salary that made her current one look like an apology. He needed an answer by the end of the month. Maya listened on the phone with the quiet, professional attention she had spent her entire career cultivating. When he hung up, she sat at her kitchen counter for a long time, looking out at the city, and tried to feel what she should have felt. Excitement. Vindication. The clean, sharp thrill of a door opening. She felt nothing of the kind. She felt the weight of her brother's last text sitting in her phone, where she had not been able to delete it. "Don't stop where I'm lying down." And underneath that quieter, more humiliating, she felt the absence of a man she had known for less than 3 months, who had not answered her last message, and who would probably never know that she had been about to leave the country in part because of him. She told Richard she needed 2 weeks to decide. The Friday, she meant to drive to Marlowe's one last time to say goodbye to the booth, if not to its occupant, was the Friday. Daniel did not show up at all. She arrived just past 7. Elaine behind the counter looked at her with the particular gentleness of waitresses who have seen too much, and shook her head before Maya had finished crossing the room. "He called, said he can't make it tonight. His little girl's in the hospital." The words landed before Maya understood them. He didn't say much, just that he had to go. Elaine wiped her hands on her apron. "Honey, he sounded scared." Maya was already moving. Her car keys were in her hand before she remembered taking them out of her bag. She did not know which hospital. She drove to the nearest one, asked at the front desk, was directed to the next nearest, and finally, at the third, 25 minutes north, along a road slick with the same rain that had been falling on and off for weeks, a nurse pointed her toward the pediatric wing. She found him in the corridor outside room 411. He was sitting on a row of plastic chairs against the wall. His shirt was untucked on one side, the collar twisted. His hair stood up where he had run his hand through it too many times. On the chair beside him sat a brown paper takeout bag from Marlowe's, untouched, the grease beginning to bleed through the bottom. He had not eaten. He had brought the food with him. He had been on his way to the diner when the call came, and he had not been able to put it down. He looked up. When he saw her, his face did something he had been holding off for 3 years. It came apart slowly, the way a wall comes apart when the mortar has finally given up. Not in a single crash, but in a long, quiet, helpless surrender. His shoulders dropped. His mouth opened around a word that did not come. He bent forward over his own knees and put his face in his hands. And Daniel Hayes, who had braided his daughter's hair that morning and ironed his own collar, and kept a promise to a dying woman every Friday, for 36 months, wept the way a man weeps when he has finally understood that he can no longer stand on his own. Maya sat down beside him. She did not say anything. She put her hand on his back between his shoulder blades, where the weight of 3 years had been quietly breaking him, and she left it there. Down the hall behind the door of room 411, Lily Hayes slept with a fever that had already broken out of danger. The nurse had said just a long night ahead, and outside the window, the rain kept on steady as a heartbeat, washing the parking lot of the third hospital Maya had walked into that night, without ever once asking herself why. The morning came gray and slow. Daniel had slept perhaps 2 hours folded into the same plastic chair, his head tipped against the wall outside Lily's room. Maya had stayed beside him the whole night. She had not slept at all. At some point near 3 in the morning, a young nurse had walked past with a folded blanket and laid it across Daniel's shoulders without saying a word, and Maya had understood in that small kindness that the hospital staff had assumed she was his wife. She had not corrected anyone. She had simply nodded her thanks and gone on watching the corridor brighten by slow degrees. Lily was sitting up in bed by 7. The fever had broken cleanly in the night, as fevers in small children sometimes do, and she was already asking for pancakes and complaining that the pillow smelled funny. Daniel went into her first. Maya waited in the corridor, her coffee gone cold in her hands, listening to the soft murmur of his voice through the door. When he came back out, his eyes were rimmed red, but he had washed his face. He had also, Maya noticed, finally tucked his shirt in. She's okay. They're keeping her till noon just to be sure. I'm glad. He sat down on the chair beside her. He did not look at her. Maya, I know. You don't. I think I do. He turned his head then, and the look on his face was so naked, so stripped of the small daily armors a man wears to get through his weeks, that she nearly reached for his hand. He did not let her speak first. I can't do this. His voice was low, careful, the voice of a man who had rehearsed the sentence in his head all night and was determined to get it out before he lost his nerve. Not because I don't, because of you. You have to understand that. It isn't because of you. Daniel, if I let go of her, Maya, if I let myself want anything else, I'm going to lose her again. That's what it feels like. And I can't lose her again. I already barely survived it the first time. His hands were braced against his knees, the knuckles broad and rough in the morning light. And Lily, she's 7. She still talks to her mother sometimes, when she thinks I can't hear. If she sees me with someone, if she thinks I forgot, you wouldn't forget. She wouldn't know that. She would. He shook his head. He was not arguing. He was simply unable in that moment to believe her. I don't deserve this, he said finally. I don't deserve to be happy when she isn't here to be happy with me. That's the truth, and I've known it for 3 years. And last night in this hallway, I almost let myself forget it, and that scared me more than anything since the day she died. The corridor was very quiet. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rattled over a threshold. A doctor laughed at something a colleague had said. The small, unbearable ordinariness of a hospital morning went on around them. Maya should have stood up. Every instinct she had spent her adult life cultivating told her to stand up, to gather her coat, to walk out with her dignity intact, to drive home and call Richard and accept the London offer, and let this whole strange detour close behind her like a door. That was what she did. That was who she was. She left rooms before rooms could leave her. She stayed. She turned in her chair so that she was facing him directly, and she said, I never told you the rest of what Ethan wrote. He looked up. The text. Don't stop where I'm lying down. I told you it was the last thing he ever sent me. I let you think I didn't know what it meant. Her voice was very even now. I knew. I've known for 2 years. I just couldn't bear to say it out loud, because saying it out loud meant I'd have to live by it. She was looking at him, but she was also in some way looking past him, at a hospital room she had not walked into in time, at a brother she had failed to sit beside at a younger version of herself, who had truly believed that the deal, closing on Tuesday, had been more important than the brother, who would not see Wednesday. He was telling me not to bury myself with him. He knew me. He knew that's exactly what I'd try to do. He knew I'd take his death, and I'd build a wall out of it, and I'd call the wall loyalty, and I'd spend the rest of my life on the wrong side of it telling myself I was honoring him. Her throat tightened, but her voice held. He wasn't asking me to forget him, Daniel. He was asking me not to lie down next to him. There's a difference. Daniel was very still. I don't know if Sarah told you anything before she died. Maya went on more gently. I didn't know her. I have no right to speak for her. But I'm going to guess she didn't ask you to stop living. I'm going to guess she asked you the opposite. I'm going to guess that's why you go to that diner every Friday in the first place, because she asked you to. His eyes filled. He did not look away from her this time. She told me not to wilt inside 4 walls, he said, and his voice was hoarse. Those were the words. Don't wilt inside 4 walls. Then she didn't want this for you. No. And she didn't want this for Lily. No. The word came out smaller the second time. It was a word that had been sitting in his chest for 3 years, refusing to be spoken. And now that it was out, he looked briefly like a man who had set down a load he had not realized he was still carrying. Maya did not move closer. She did not take his hand. She understood with the same clean instinct that had made her stay beside him all night, that this was not a moment to be rushed. I'm not asking you for anything, she said quietly. I just want you to know that I'm not asking you to stop loving her. I would never ask you that. Whatever this is, whatever we are or aren't, there's room in it for her. There has to be. Otherwise, it isn't worth anything. He lowered his face into his hands. His shoulders shook once and then steadied. When he lifted his head, he said, Will you come meet her? Lily. Yes. Maya breathed out slowly. Are you sure? No, he said. But I think Sarah would be. He took her into the room a few minutes later. Lily was sitting cross-legged on the bed, with a juice box, watching cartoons on a tablet a nurse had loaned her. Her hair was still in the crooked braid Daniel had put in, the morning before, half undone, now frizzed at the temples from a night of fever sweat. She looked up when they came in, and her eyes went straight to Maya, with the unembarrassed appraisal of a 7-year-old, who had not yet learned to pretend she wasn't curious. Lily, this is Maya. She's my friend. She came to the hospital to make sure we were okay. Lily considered Maya for a long moment. Daddy. Yeah, baby. Mrs. Whitlock said you've been smiling more lately, at your coffee, in the mornings. Lily took a careful sip of her juice. Is it because of her? Daniel's face went hot. He was a grown man who had stood on construction sites in the rain and faced down clients twice his size, and his daughter with 1 juice box and 1 steady gaze had just disarmed him completely. I think maybe, he said, more softly than he meant to. Lily nodded, as if this was a satisfactory answer to a question she had been considering for some time. Then she looked at her father, and her small face turned very serious, in the particular way of children who are about to deliver an opinion they consider important. You smile more since the lady. That was all. She went back to her cartoon. The juice box gave a small, defeated wheeze. The morning kept on. Daniel stood in the middle of the hospital room, with his hand pressed against his mouth, and the look on his face was something Maya hoped she would remember for a long time. Not because it was beautiful exactly, but because it was the look of a man hearing something he had needed to hear from the only person in the world who could have said it to him. He bent down and kissed the top of his daughter's head. He breathed in the soft warmth of her hair, 3 days unwashed, and hospital pillow, and the faint, sweet leftover heat of a fever that had finally broken. She told Richard no on Monday morning. He took it badly, the way men like Richard take no first with disbelief, then with the careful condescending patience of someone certain she would come to her senses by the end of the week. She did not. She did not even waver. When she hung up the phone, she looked out the window of her glass office at the city she had spent her whole career trying to conquer, and she felt for the first time in 2 years the small, stubborn warmth of something that was not ambition, and was not grief, and was not fear. She did not know what to call it yet. She thought she would learn. The Friday after that, Daniel arrived at Marlowe's at the usual time. He sat down at table 7 beneath the lamp that had finally, the previous Tuesday, been replaced by a steadier bulb that did not flicker. Elaine came over with the coffee pot, and her eyebrows already raised, because tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Daniel had asked her on the way in for a third-place setting. "You sure, honey?" "I'm sure." She set the third plate down without a word. Maya came in a few minutes later, the bell above the door chiming the way it had on the night she had first walked in. Lily was holding her hand. The little girl had asked that morning whether she could come this time, and Daniel had not been able to think of a single reason to say no. On the way in, Lily had stopped at the planter beside the diner door, the one Marlowe's owner kept full of small white blooms through the autumn, and asked if she could pick just one. Daniel had hesitated, then nodded. She had brought the flower in carefully, both hands cupped around the stem, and now she set it down on the table in front of her father, with the solemn formality of a child who has been given an important task. They sat down together at table 7. Daniel placed one plate in front of himself, one in front of Lily, and the third carefully, deliberately, with the small, daily tenderness Maya had recognized in him from the first night across, from his own seat in front of the chair that had been Sarah's for 3 years, and would he had decided always be hers. He took the white flower from Lily's hands and laid it gently beside that plate. Maya took the chair beside Lily, not the chair across from Daniel. He noticed. He looked at her, and the corner of his mouth lifted, and she understood that he had noticed, and that he was grateful. The meal was ordinary. The meatloaf was the same meatloaf it had always been. Lily talked too much, the way 7-year-olds do when they have an audience, and Daniel laughed at her. Really laughed, the kind that came from somewhere lower than his throat, and Maya watched him, the way a person watches a sunrise she had begun to think she would not live to see. Toward the end of the meal, Lily looked at the white flower on the plate across the table. "Daddy, who's that flower for?" Daniel set down his fork. He looked at Maya. He looked at his daughter, who was waiting for an answer with the patient seriousness of a child who already half understood. He took a slow breath. "It's for the person," he said, "who taught me that loving somebody doesn't take up all the room. It just makes more room. So there's space for the people who are still here, and space for the people who had to go. Both. At the same time." Lily considered this. "For Mommy." "Yeah, baby, for Mommy." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her green beans. Outside, the autumn wind moved through the parking lot. Inside, beneath a lamp that no longer flickered, 3 people sat at a table that had once been set for 2, and the chair across from Daniel was still in the way that mattered most, not empty at all. It just had room beside it now, for everyone who was still here.